Hey listeners, this is Ben, the Amateur Exegete, and you're listening to Episode 7 of Bible Study for Amateurs. Today's episode is, It's All Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic to Me. In the television series Star Trek, the crew of the Starship Enterprise travel throughout the quadrant on a mission of exploration. In so doing, they encounter sentient life forms with developed cultures and languages. But how is it that they all seem to understand English? It's simple. The universal translator. With it, an alien's tongue could be rendered intelligible for English-speaking Earthlings. Of course, it wasn't always successful. Darmak and Jalad at Tanagra. Over the course of the last few episodes, we've looked at 7 problems or complexities readers face when trying to understand the Bible. This list comes from Kristen Swenson and her 2020 volume, A Most Peculiar Book, The Inherent Strangeness of the Bible. This week, we consider problem number 6. The Bible was written in languages that are utterly unfamiliar to most readers today. Specifically, much of the Bible was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. If you heard that and thought, it's all Greek to me, you'd be wrong. That's Hebrew, specifically the very first verse of the Torah. When God began to create the sky and land. This is Greek. En arche ein halagas, kai halagas ein prostantheon, kai theas ein halagas. That's the very first verse of the Gospel of John as it appears in the Greek New Testament. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or God was the Word, but that's a subject for another time. When reading an English translation, it helps to keep in mind that we are never reading the original. We are reading an interpretation of it. Why? Because all translation, by its nature, is interpretation. Translators make choices about what a word, idiom, or sentence means. As Swenson notes, there is rarely ever a one-to-one correlation between a source language and the intended target language. So let me give you an example of this from the Book of Psalms. This is what Psalm 132 verses 3 to 5 look like if you render it in a more or less word-for-word form. If I enter into the tent of my house, if I climb upon the couch of my bed, if I give sleep to my eyes, slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for Yahweh, a dwelling for the strong one of Jacob. Now, here is the New Revised Standard Version and how it renders these 3 verses. I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. If you paid attention, you'll have noticed that my literal translation and the NRSV's translation don't exactly sync up. Specifically, whereas my word-for-word translation uses the conditional particle if, reflecting the underlying Hebrew word im, The NRSV uses no such conditional particle and instead uses the negating term not, which is not found in the underlying Hebrew. What's going on? The translators of the NRSV are offering readers a linguistic compromise. In English, conditional sentences begin with an if clause and are typically followed by a then clause. If it rains, then I will bring an umbrella. If you walk the dog, then I will pay you $10. But in Psalm 132, verses 3 and 4, we have an if clause, but no corresponding then clause. This is strange to us, but it is not at all that odd in Hebrew. The psalmist is essentially making an oath that says, if I go home and rest, but I have not built a place for Yahweh to do the same, then let something horrible befall me. But rather than come out and say, then let something befall me, the psalmist leaves it unsaid, heightening the dramatic effect. That is to say, so horrible is the thing that would befall him that it cannot be spoken. Thus, this if clause, with no then clause, is an indication of his devotion to giving his God a house in which to rest. You can see the difficulty here for a translator. Since we don't normally do this in English, translators have to come up with a way to render the clause, so they turn these conditional sentences into future indicatives, using the negating word not. I will not enter my house. I will not give sleep to my eyes. But while we get the sense of the underlying Hebrew, namely the notion that the psalmist really wants to build Yahweh a house, we miss out on its force. The psalmist's zeal for giving his God a home is more salient in the underlying Hebrew than it is in the corresponding English. I wonder how the Universal Translator would handle these verses. That's all the time we've got this week. We'll see you next time. And remember, in the words of Richard Elliott Friedman, one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. See ya.